Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Becky Casey at York University, a researcher and postdoctorate. So Becky, in the last segment, you were talking about a lot of the hardships that this group of workers that you've been studying, this 494 injured workers. Right. So who's in that group? What are we talking about? Is this all injured workers, or is this a specific group of them? Who is this?
So we had a sampling criteria. I wasn't involved in this process. I think maybe you actually could have been, but it's been a few years now too since it happened. But they wanted to get first-time claimants to try to find the people that just had this one injury. Although, as it turns out, some of them had second injuries that happened during the process of collecting data. But then they had to be English fluent speakers because there wasn't money for translators. So that's a limitation.
So what we know is that people that have English as a second language maybe fall through the cracks more quickly than the rest.
Right.
Of,
So they might fall through the cracks at the compensation board because it's hard to navigate that system, but then they also just didn't get included in our survey either, so their voices are missing. And that's an important thing that we need to recognize because they might have different experiences or similar even, but we just don't know based on the data that we've collected. And they had to be a certain age, which I believe was about 25-ish to, I think it was 50, maybe somewhere in there. So kind of in the midlife stage. We did have some older, maybe it was 55 because we did get some people were a bit older, but in general they were in that midlife. And they had to have a NEL award, the non-economic loss award, to recognize that they have a permanent impairment, or we try to use the word disability in our paper because we do recognize that it is more than just the impairment, that it has had an impact on various aspects of their life.
So these are the workers that probably have a more serious injury that stays with them for the rest of their life.
Right, so they'll never recover. And I mean, some of their injuries in terms of the qualitative piece I did, like one injured worker told me that, he sustained a knee injury, which he could have sustained, playing sports or something, and he doesn't really see it as something that's really bothering he can still do his job because he works at a desk, but did say, I don't know what's going to happen to my knee down the road. Like, will he need a knee replacement? Will he need he may need to use mobility devices. Like, he's just not sure, but he's trying to stay active and keep it strong so that he can go longer with the mobility that he has today. And then I did have more severe, where one woman spoke about how, she's really worried about her future because she has a neck injury, and she's worried if she does hurt it anymore, she's going to end up in a neck brace, she's going to end up in a wheelchair, she's going to need someone to feed her. And, she's trying to avoid that from happening, obviously, but she just doesn't know what could happen from one day to the next.
So that issue of people not knowing the future and how to navigate through the healthcare system and the compensation system, what do people talk about that? How does that affect them?
Right. So in the interviews that I did, what was really interesting is that there's different stages of the compensation. So some people were still getting money from WSIB. Some were getting like a maintenance payment to help them because they weren't able to do certain tasks. Some of them had been deemed workable even though they weren't able to return to work, so they weren't getting any money.
So if people are deemed to be able to do the job but they don't have it, they still lose any financial benefits.
That's right. And then there were some some actually were on social assistance, on CPP disability, because there's no other way for them to survive financially, right? But for those that did have compensation, a lot of them spoke about the fear of being denied. So even though they have been approved and everything is going fine, there is that piece in the back of their mind is like, is this going to continue? Will I be able to rely on this income until I turn, 65 if their recent injuries. So, and that can cause a mental health issues because you're never sure what's going to happen. And a lot of them did talk about depression and how at the time of the interview, a lot of them had managed their depression either with medications, or they had learned mechanisms, or they figured out ways to strategize how to control their anxiety or their depression. But it is always there, this fact that I'm always relying on this compensation system, and I don't know how long it'll be there for me.
Right. So you've kind of been working on a number of these projects while you were doing your PhD at McMaster.
Right.
And so when did that finish? So you're now a PhD.
Right.
When did you graduate? When?
I think it was in 2014. So
Okay.
still not too long ago, but so I've been trying to just finish up some of the projects that I've been doing that I did in my PhD and trying to fill in. I'm talking with Perry Ballantyne about doing more work on return to work outcomes, maybe more on chronic health conditions to find out whether or not they're related. Like, do you as an injured worker think that your arthritis or high blood pressure or ulcers or asthma is related to your work injury? And if it is, are you getting compensation? Because we did ask these questions in the survey. It's just that there's so much data that we've only really chipped away at a small piece of it. And there's still a lot more that we could do. And also, we really need more longitudinal data. It would be fantastic to
Longitudinal, what does that mean?
So long term, over time. So right now it's been 10 years since we've collected the data from the survey, and it'd be fantastic to follow back with these people and say, what's happened to you now? Are you still working? How has your health changed? How has your income changed? What are your fears about, now you're 10 years older? What do you think is going to happen when you're 65, 75, 85?
So does the compensation board know about this stuff, or is this kind of new research in terms of what happens to people over time?
I'm not sure. I have a feeling that they don't know a whole lot, that they're not necessarily keeping track, especially of those who they've cut off benefits for whatever reasons. They don't necessarily care what happens because they're not a claimant anymore. But what's interesting is that these injuries, especially the ones that we looked at, Perry and I, is that it's long term. It's never going to go away. They've been recognized as having a permanent impairment that is long lasting.
That's
and
right.
Yet
Permanent.
we don't know what is going to happen to them or what is happening to them. And they feel alone, a lot of them, I think, from the interviews of that, my health is changing, but I just don't know what to expect.
So you've just published a paper in, I think it's one of the leading journals.
It's a top journal it's the Journal of Occupation and Environmental Medicine.
Okay, so
Yeah.
a major journal in
Yeah.
healthcare. And so what was the focus of that article?
So in it, we looked at we compared injured workers to a non-injured worker sample in the Canadian Community Health Survey, and we looked at the health conditions they reported pre-injury for the injured workers to see if they were different or similar to the group that we were comparing. And there were a few differences, especially women in the injured worker, but it could be a sampling issue. But their health conditions were very similar.
So just so I understand, so you've got all this data on these 494 injured
Yeah.
workers, and then you go to Stats Canada and you match up a
Right.
person the same age, the same sex.
Yeah. And those were the only two characteristics. It would be good to do a few other characteristics, but it just didn't work, and it would take a lot to pull that sample together, but that could be future research.
Okay. And so now the research is looking at this group that got hurt, that started off like the group that didn't get hurt.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, please stay with us because we're going to find out more. How did these two groups fare years down the road? Please stay with us. We'll be right back.